Mabuhay everyone. Naomi, Ms. Arante Elizabeth, Mr. Tikis John Raymond, Ms. Valentina Lay, and I am T. Panjana Grishal, and we're going to talk about tourism and hospitality during the Renaissance and Elizabethan eras. But before that, let's watch the video about it.
The Elizabethan Age. England was close to a civil war because the Protestants, Catholics, Parliament and the monarchy had battles. This happens because Queen Mary, a fanatic Catholic, wants to convert England back to a Catholicism. After Queen Elizabeth got crowned, the British Golden Age began. Elizabeth managed to stop the beginning of the Civil War. Under the rule of Queen Elizabeth, the culture developed, and fields like science or the theatre got revived. This happened because she was a big fan of the theatre and also very interested in science, but this wasn't enough for her, so she decided to reform the universities and the school system. England also became the first naval power of the world after the glorious win against the Spanish Armada. After the defeat, the English colonized the New World with success. The English sailed to Newfoundland and expanded further and further at the American East Coast. A new place to live was born. Because of that, the economic rise, the age is known as the Golden Age in British history.
Travel and exploration are basic to human nature. Man has traveled since the earliest times, although the term tourism was used only in the 19th century. Tourism is derived from the Hebrew word Torah, which means studying, learning, or searching. On the other hand, hospitality derived from the Latin word hospitare, meaning to receive as a guest. It refers to the act of providing food, beverages, or lodging to travelers. Travel for leisure purposes has evolved from an experience reserved for very few people into something enjoyed by many. Historically, the ability to travel was reserved for royalty and the upper classes. The Renaissance period comes from the French word rebirth, a period of European history and also a period of new inventions and beliefs, while the Elizabethan era started in 1550 until 1600. This period is also called Elizabethan period because in that time England was ruled by the great Queen Elizabeth I. By the end of this lesson, students should be able to gain knowledge about the origins of the tourism industry, understand the history of tourism during the Renaissance and Elizabethan eras, and last, identify key points regarding tourism and hospitality during the Renaissance and Elizabethan eras. To continue the discussion, let's call Miss Araneta.
Thank you, Ms. Stepan. So, the Renaissance spanned roughly through the 14th to 17th centuries, and it was a rebirth of the Asian classical era after the Dark Ages. And travel for education became popular in the 16th century. During the Renaissance, few renowned universities were developed, and travel for education was introduced largely by the British. As the Renaissance spread throughout Europe, bringing with it a new artistic and academic focus, it became fashionable for young aristocrats to visit the great masterpieces of the classical era as part of their classical education that focuses mainly on Roman art and architecture. And this became the Grand Tour. Under Elizabeth I, young men seeking positions in court were encouraged to travel to the continent to widen their education. This practice was gradually adopted by others on the lower social scale, and in time, it became recognized that the education of a gentleman should be completed by a grand tour of the cultural centers of the continent, which lasted for 3 years. The Grand Tour was the name of a traditional trip through Europe undertaken by upper class boys as they were coming of age. It was mostly the British nobility and landed gentry who went on a grand tour, but this did extend to other wealthy Europeans and later South and North Americans as well as Filipinos. According to the National Trust, the term Grand Tour was coined by the Catholic priest and travel writer Richard Lascelles, who used it in his influential guidebook, which is The Voyage of Italy, that was published in 1670 to describe young lords traveling abroad to learn about art, architecture, and antiquity. The Grand Tour was a form of travel from around 1550 to 1850. It was at its most popular during the 18th century and was said to be the way to end a boy's education, making them a man. Often, these adolescent boys would be accompanied by tutors who would make the scenes in front of them come to life. It was more of a hands on education, much like how we have field trips today. The Grand Tour, however, was much more lengthy because, again, the travel lasted for about 3 years. And to add more information about the Grand Tour, here's Miss Arante.
Thank you, Miss Araneta. So let me share with you the importance of the Grand Tour. So the Grand Tour is important to the overall history of tourism because it represented travel for educational and recreational purposes rather than, for example, trade or military reasons. It contributed greatly to the cultural, social, architectural, gastronomic, political, and artistic evolution of the home countries of these travelers, especially when, as time went on, it became accessible to not only gentry but artists, collectors, designers, and more. These people would take influence from the things they saw abroad, and buildings in Britain would follow architectural styles the designer had seen in Italy, for example. So it is also important because it was during this large time frame that the term tourist was uh, first properly used. Without it, the history of tourism as we know it would look massively different. People will people were traveling, although not in groups, as this was before proper public transport existed. Visiting new and visiting new destinations and bringing back stories of their trips. As mentioned, the Grand Tour expanded and from being purely a British upper class thing to being something taken by the working class and as well as nobility from other countries. And it was highly influential. So, next slide, please. As young men sought intellectual improvement in the continent, the Sikh sought a remedy for their illness in spas or medicinal baths. The term spa is derived from the Walloon word spa themselves in the healing waters. When entertainment was added, these watering places became resort hotels. So the Tunbridge Wells in Kent or near the London became famous as a spa in the 1600s. Tunbridge Wells is known for its Georgian and Victorian architecture, with history-loving tourists flocking to the village area on the south side of town. So to give us further information, here is Miss Tolentino.
A trending itinerary. During the 16th and 18th centuries, a standard itinerary was popularized, while the tours include many European destinations. The grand tours typically started in London and included Paris, but focused mainly on Italy, especially Rome. Few visit as far as Greece, which was still under Turkish rule. The grand tours visit famous ruins, architectures, fountains, and churches. Admission and Greco-Roman statues painting included both of private collection and museums. Travel guide was available for grand tour and tour typically lasted from months and sometimes years. Besides visiting art and architectures, a grand tours could be listen to music, visit theaters, be tutored in language, when sing, dancing, riding, and other popular activities. The Grand Tour was often seen as a rite of passage and was considered a symbol of status. For more information, let's call Mr. Tikis.
Thank you, Ms. Tolentino. Souvenirs and postcards. During the said eras, grand tourists returned to display items otherwise unavailable at home. Popular souvenirs included art, books, sculptures, clothes, glass, and coins, and other cultural gems. Micromosaic became popular and often depicted famous landmarks. It could be worn as jewelry or be sent home in the form of small pictures to friends and family, as a forerunner to the modern postcard. Cityscape and landscape painting or vetude became immensely popular during the time of the Grand Tour and provided snapshots to tourists that could bring back and present as a visual tale of their travels. Etchings of the Grand Tour also became very popular. Some Grand Tourists commissioned their own artists to accompany their travels. Let me call on Miss Tolentino to discuss what the tour guide is.
Thank you, Mr. Tikis. Tour guide. Tour guide, while it was a common practice to hire a personal tour guide for a guide tour, printed travelers and itineraries become a popular both travelers and non-travelers. Publish accounts and letter of personal experience gave insight what your grand tour could offer the populace of time, but they also help illuminate the historic trend for us a modern times. And let's call on Mr. Tikis for
Thank you again, Ms. Tolentino. Itinerary for Grand Tour. The Elizabeth travelers used to complete the Grand Tour with a span of average of 3 years. Their itineraries used to involve tour guides and cover places such as England, Central Europe, and Western Europe. And that's all. That's our report. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you have learned something from us. Thank you, and mabuhay.